Hello, hello, most beautiful stars. Hello, hello, you lovely people. Good day, good day. It is Wednesday, September 11th, 2024. I do Edgar Cayce Life Skill Studies sometime on a Wednesday. That's kind of where I am with that now. At least I can commit to a Wednesday. I see that Seeker of Truth 2, Miss Shelley is in the chat. Good to see you, my dear. I am Courtney, host of Stars of the Morning Light. I will try to say hello to those who come in live. I am live. Sometimes you get some videos from me, sometimes you get live interaction with me. You never know what you'll find at Stars of the Morning Light. There's so much going on in playlists, and every Friday now, live at 11 a.m., I am back to doing those messages, which everyone really enjoyed before, and so do I. It's great to be with you on Friday morning. I see Kim has come in. Good to see you, my dear. So we are in Edgar's bio. I love being in Edgar's bio. It's so much more fun for me. And I hopefully for you as well. And today we cover so much cool stuff. It's so awesome. I see that Robert V came into the chat. Good to see you, Robert. I hope you are well. Um, Today is going to cover just fun stuff that I know people are going to be intrigued about. And it is quite intriguing. So I'm going to back it up a bit because it's been it's been a while since we were in his bio. So I'm going to back it up some to where we left off before. All right. So Edgar and Gertrude are married. They are in Bowling Green. Remember where we left the last little bit of his bio was when Lahane and him, remember Lahane was actually in college now. A lot of strings were being pulled for him to actually go to medical school when he was kind of referring to himself as a doctor before, based off of Edgar's readings, his medical readings. And then the world caught up to that, and Lahane was going to be, ostracized in a lot of ways. But those who believed in Edgar, and Lahane was the one who conducted the readings for Edgar, took it all down, was facilitating the readings. Because of that, a lot of strings were pulled with bigger people, right? Other doctors, real doctors, professors that pulled the strings for Lahane to go to actual medical school. Well, where we ended last time is that Cayce was visiting him at college. And do remember, guys, that this is their Cayce right now in this, he's, a young 20-something-year-old man. So, yes, in the turn of the century, because this is about 1903, 05 that we're talking about, were the men of that time maybe a bit older in aspirations, let's say, and responsibilities? Yes, than of today's world. But they were still young men. They were still young guys, which it's kind of a running joke in my family that men don't truly grow up until they hit 60 or older. We love you, men. We're just picking on you. So they are still young men. So imagine Cayce's visiting Lahane at college. What happened was some of Lahane's fellow students, his peers, did not appreciate how Lahane kind of was just admitted into college with no real academic background and or standing, let's say. And they didn't appreciate it. So they were going to do a prank, knowing that Cayce was there and knowing that Cayce is really who got Lahane into college. So they set it up that during one of a very esteemed professor was going to be doing a lecture, that they were gonna actually have, like, Lahane and Cayce in a room adjacent to it or next to it, what have you, and while Cayce goes under for a medical reading, they were gonna open the doors so the professor giving the lecture would overhear what was happening, and they thought this prank would immediately expose Cayce for not knowing anything and being a fraud and immediately get Lahane kicked out. Well, lo and behold, it backfired on them. It was all set up. Cayce went into his trance-like state. Lahane's asking these medical questions. Cayce is answering as he has always done before, as Lahane would take it all down and write it all down and be the one facilitating. They opened the doors. The professor did overhear this and stopped and listened. And the professor immediately started walking in the room to listen to it more, leaving his students. I mean, he was enthralled with what was going on. And when Cayce came out of the reading, that very esteemed professor, medical professor, asked where Cayce was getting his information because he has never in life heard it spoken so accurately, so eloquently, being able to explain very complex medical stuff. He was extremely impressed. Because Cayce was even saying stuff that, I mean, they might not even, I would say they were just approaching in the medical field. They were just realizing things like how in today's world, new science is starting to come out, and we're like, whoa, what is this? Same in the medical field of the turn of the century. Cayce was exposing it through all of his communication. He shouldn't have known any of that. The professor started asking Cayce, where are you from? Where do you study? How do you know this? Well, to make a long story short, it backfired. It backfired so much on those peers that wanted to prank and get rid of those Cayce and Lahane. It backfired big time. Okay. That is where we left off on the last one. All right. So glad everybody's here. I am Courtney, host of Stars of the Morning Light. Settle on in because this is going to be a fun biography video. This is going to be a really good one. After that, remember, Cayce is married to Gertrude, and on their wedding night, well, not exactly their wedding night, like 3 nights later, but still honeymoon, Cayce was kind of peer pressured into doing a reading in front of people, and Gertrude extremely did not like that. We talked about this in a previous video that, she laid in bed that night realizing that she was actually married to 2 different people in the same body, 2 different people. You have the Edgar that would sit with her and they would read books to each other and very kind and sincere and quiet and loves nature, um, apathetic to others, a very beautiful being. And then you have this Edgar that has this gift that even when he's in a trance, oftentimes it doesn't even seem to be his voice communicating. And that's why I mentioned these are still young men. The reason why is because after that whole episode with Lahane and him and people trying to get him kicked out, but it's actually backfired and they are praised. The doctors very much, all sorts of professors there were, who is this Cayce? What is going on? Right? And it didn't even have to be of the medical variety. I mean, the college business department was like, what is Cayce? What is going on? So, word started to spread. What then came out of that was Casey started to feel, wait a minute, I fell into a trap because somebody wanted to entrap Lahane. Even though it came out okay, I can't put myself in that kind of position again, right? That's true. You have to pay attention to who you're associated with, right? You have to make sure that you are safe and protected, especially as a reader, as a messenger. So Casey decided, as these professionals and professors were getting wind, that he would kind of detach a bit from Lahane and allow a man named Dr. Blackburn, that he met through at that college, that university, Dr. Blackburn, to form like a committee to run experiments with Casey. This committee was designed of, I think there were 6 men and 1 woman, and she was really more there to transcribe. Much faster and easier, as these men are more observing, she could transcribe, and her father, who was a doctor, had gotten a reading from Casey many years ago, a medical one, and it saved his life. So she was willing and ready to, yeah, I can transcribe. I want to be here. I want to witness what's going on, right? So 6 men and this beautiful woman transcribing. So 7 people in a room and Casey, right? For those who are interested in numbers, right? That I mean 8 total. Different experiments. And this is when information beyond medical started to be asked or revealed, talked about. A lot of things happened. And they did refer to all of this as experiments. And I completely get that. I really do. Sometimes we have this negative uh, feeling when we hear words like experiments, but yet we do it all the time in our waking life. We do. Everybody does. We'll throw a little something out there to see what sticks. That's kind of an experiment. We'll do this to see what happens. It's an experiment. We do experiments with ourselves all the time. If I sat and tried to manifest for 3 days straight something, let's see if it happens. That's an experiment. You have an hypothesis and you run the experiment, you get a result, right? We're actually running quote unquote experiments all the time. We just, that word kind of gives us a weird feeling about what we're doing, but we do it all the time. Even when we're feeding our little kids, our little ones. Well, let's see if they'll eat corn tonight over broccoli. Let's see if they'll eat carrots over bananas. We're running quote unquote kind of an experiment, just to different degrees. But because we live in a world that is highly influenced by what goes on in our science, we're kind of timid by words like this. I'm bringing this up because of where we're going to end off today, which is going to make me happy. I know where we're going. So, they were running little experiments, and that's what we're going to talk about. And it's fascinating stuff. A committee, 6 men, 1 woman. I will say, when these experiments or when they would bring Edgar through trance, what have you, he not all of them would always be present. I mean, sometimes it would just be Blackburn there. He was the main guy. He kind of took the role of Lahane when Edgar was detaching. Okay. Oh, and I want to say, he did not tell Gertrude about this committee. That will come up much later, probably not in this episode, but he did not tell his wife that he was allowing a committee to be formed so they could run experiments on whatever his gift, quote unquote, is. Because he knew how she felt about things. But some of this, like I said, was so Edgar could also protect himself. He needed to have somewhat of a trusted group around him to even understand himself. So let's get into some of the experiments, which is so much fun. This is when they started to ask different questions. Like Blackburn, he had a patient. Actually, I think it was his mother. Blackburn's mother was ill, but she was in a town down a ways, down yonder, as they would probably said in Kentucky, down yonder. He asked Cayce about his mother, but before he got the medical information, quote unquote, he wanted Cayce to describe the room that she was in. And Cayce, in his trance like state, he started to describe this room to the point of what manufacturer stamp was on the, bottom side of the bed. He was talking about the colors on the walls, what pictures were there, what wood the bed was made out of. I mean, he went into such detail that by the end of all of that, because he just kept going, he just kept going, just kept going. Blackburn, he is new to how to facilitate this. Lahane was there from kind of the beginning. So Blackburn had kind of always struggled with trying to keep up with what Cayce would just say. So by the time he got through describing legitimately pretty much every detail, I mean, they said, he was describing the bolts and screws to things and where those bolts and screws were manufactured. I mean, he went into detail that they completely forgot to ask about stuff by then. And Blackburn and another gentleman then left to go see his patient, who was his mother, to just see if what was said was verified about the room. And so they're flipping over the mattress, looking at the bed, looking at all this stuff. Everything was accurate. That is when the true experiments really started, because they realized within that Cayce was able to go much further beyond than just what's happening in our human bodies with individuals. He's able to describe all sorts of stuff. So how far can we take this, right? Which I do want to say here as I pause for a moment. When I do readings, and sometimes it's always, the question as to where's this lost documentation I need, something like that. Where's this? Where's that? Where's my grandmother's old copy of the family will or Bible or whatever it may be, right? When I go to describe to these people where it's at, oftentimes this is what's interesting. They don't even know what I'm talking about. Um, because I might say no, like they'll try to come up with what I'm saying. And I'm like, no, no, no. Hear my words. It's not in the drawer, but it's in a box that originally was in that drawer that has now been taken out and put in the corner, and there's a bunch of stacks of paper on it that also has X, Y, and Z on top of it, and they'll be thinking and thinking, but because they technically haven't seen that box in, you know, 6 years, it is hard for that person to go, "Wait, a box that was in the drawer that then got moved here and then moved there, this was put on top." They can't trace in their mind w where the location. I mean, I might even be able to say, "It's in the corner of the basement," but because they have so much stuff in the corner of their basement, so I will say that sometimes when someone is searching for something, it is not easy for me to describe things because most of the time people are not conscious of where they're even putting things down. So eventually, I mean, it'll be like weeks later, they'll text me or email me and say, "I finally found it and you were right. It was in the X, Y, and Z spot that they were not even aware of that was there." So oftentimes with readings, people are trying to go off of what they remember, what they're acknowledging, what they can see around. When I'm seeing 6 years ago when you had it in the drawer and then you took it out of the drawer and then they're showing me where the all the transactions, all the movement of this one particular thing. So, sometimes I will say that that part is a bit difficult because S I will admit this. Oftentimes, somebody will say, "Oh, I already looked there." And then I have to pause, communicate, and they might have looked, but it was a glance. They might have looked and they ruffled through some things. Because then I will ask, "Did they already look there?" And then I will be shown how they looked through, right? So, when it's down to, like, the little minutia like that, the little things, sometimes with readings, it is not as easy because the messenger is being presented from start to finish, and many people don't remember start, nor the middle. So, to bring them to an end is not easy. And this is nothing against it's human nature. I mean, if you ask me right now where something would be in my house, I'd be like, "I don't know." It's human nature. So with when we do readings like that, it's not as easy for someone to automatically know where something is because we're usually not conscious as to where we put random things or even heck where we put our wedding ring. Like we're just not conscious of stuff. So, I wanted to make that clear as in if you're getting readings from whomever, it could be factual, but it might take in on where that person is describing. So that's a little side note. For those who don't know, I started this Edgar Cayce series to bring the turn of the 19th century up 100 years so we could talk about all sorts of things related to the Akashic, to his life, to his readings, his predictions, and see where we are in today's world with everything. And that is a human nature. We've been misplacing things purposely and unpurposely forever and ever. So that is just a human thing that we do. All right. So this is when they're like, okay, more than just medical can be asked here. So where do we go with this? What do we want to present? There was one of the first ones. One of the first ones. Actually, you know what? Sorry, I'm pausing for a moment. They did one that they then were able to get a whole bunch of people in on the experiment. This is where I want to start with this, folks. So, Edgar, let me find his actual regard in this, what he said. Oftentimes in Edgar's readings, let's say biblical quotes or biblical concepts would come through. So Edgar would be talking to people and he would say, your body's a living temple. Well, a lot of the doctors, a lot of the scientists, a lot of the professionals would, you know, glance over what was said or not take it as, it was the turn of the century. So spiritualist movement, a lot of science, a lot of this, that biblical terminology wasn't really apropos to their train of thought. Well, because of a lot of terms about the body and it being a temple, and Edgar starting to talk about um, how the mind works, right? How the mind works. He was caught saying, I'm going to find it for you so I can quote it. I want to quote it correctly. I was in the wrong spot in my book. I apologize. So, as we've learned when we've been doing the secrets of the universe and how to use them, there was a whole section in there about how your mind is a builder. Well, this somewhat came from him quoting biblical things, but people not knowing how to reference it. I do want to tell you right now that happens with me a lot, but it's because um, terminology from the Bible means a whole different thing to me than what is standardly taught and preached. And it will come up in readings a lot with people, but I also then have to have the discernment as to, do I use that context or do I use a different context to explain what's going on, right? But he would just say it because Edgar he didn't think he had the consciousness to also communicate with this and make the discerning um, messages to be discerned. He just spoke. So Edgar at one point was trying to inform people, like when he talks about your body is a living temple, your mind is a builder. He said that constantly. It was in reference to a lot of what we know of today's world. What we think about happens. This is all new to them. So I'm going to read something. The team of doctors also experimented with Cayce's apparent ability to cure himself of his speech difficulties. Remember, Edgar would lose his voice. Most authentic messengers lose their voice. It's not so easy for this throat. um, but then he would go into a trance and they would ask, how can Cayce cure his laryngitis, right? In trance, Cayce was asked to explain how the circulation in his body was changed merely by a command or a suggestion from the person conducting the reading. Cayce reportedly lectured the team of doctors on the power of the mind over body. So remember, he would be in a trance. Lahane, back when Lahane was doing it, would ask Cayce, as he's in a trance, who then can speak perfectly fine. In his waking life, he has laryngitis, he can't speak. Cayce would then explain to Lahane what this body, Cayce's body, would need to do to fix his laryngitis. So then down the road, as they're running experiments, they didn't ask, how can Cayce fix it? They asked, how do you know that if we introduce an idea. If we command this body while he's in a trance, it'll work. How do you know that? Right? That was more their question. So they're going deeper. Cayce reportedly lectured the team of doctors on the power of mind over body. As Cayce, in trance, would state in thousands of later readings, mind is the builder, the physical is the result. The source, quote unquote, as Lehane and now Blackburn had begun to refer to Cayce's higher self, they thought he's communicating with the higher self. I have no problem with that. It's pretty much his higher self that's able to communicate with the Akashic and then vice versa, right? The source, as Lehane and now Blackburn had begun to refer to Cayce's higher self, had the power of mind control and was the controlling factor in one of the fundamental laws of nature. The material conditions in the body can be direct outgrowth of the thoughts of the individual. A person could, by establishing control over his or her own thoughts, heal or even visibly harm himself or herself. This is a quote. Every thought is a deed, Cayce said in a trance. What is held in the mind largely determines the context of the content of the experience. So we know this now. We know that if we keep talking horribly about ourselves, our physical body's going to experience. We know if we keep saying that we feel sick, our physical body's going to get sick. We know this stuff now, very radical and new at the turn of the century. This concept of how much our mind contributes to what's going on with this body, how much we can actually control what happens with this body. I mean, if we're already thinking, damn, flu season's coming, well, you're sure as shit probably going to get it, right? We know this concept, radical in this time. So, what they decided to do to run this experiment, they, and actually, I guess the Akashic, knowing that there's a committee there, suggested doing this. And it's like, but they were trying to help whomever he's talking to in the Akashic, the beings in the Akashic. They're actually trying to help heighten human conscious awareness by explaining, do this, committee. So they got instructions to take what would be a very healthy, normal, perfectly healthy young person, like a teenager or a young adult, in perfect health. Take them and induce the idea that they're sick. So one of the doctors was like, well, hey, we can do my nephew. Without him knowing, I need to put that there. Without him knowing, I just did an exam on him. He's a perfect, healthy, young, strapping young man, right? We can use him for this experiment. And we kind of know what his schedule is. They needed that. So knowing the young man's at least morning schedule, he leaves the house, he walks and gets a coffee, he stops and talks to this, then he's got to go to work. I mean, they know his schedule. So what they decided to do was, you know, over a couple of days leading into this, they went to the restaurant and said, "Hey, we'll just call him Jacob. When Jacob comes in this morning, we would like you to say, are you doing okay? How are you feeling? You look a little pale." And then when he goes to the next person, "Hey, how are you feeling today? You look a little placid." To introduce something into this young man's mind by saying, "Hey, how do you feel? You're not looking all that good." That kid was perfectly fine. The first time, the first one, as he's drinking his coffee, they said it, and he's like, "No, I feel good. I'm fine." Then he walks out. The second time, he's grabbing a newspaper. "How do you feel today? You don't look so good." "I don't? I don't look so good? Well, now that you mention it, I don't know, my shoulder kinda hurts." That was by the second person. By the third person, as he's walking through the streets, going to work, having to communicate, now this thought is in his mind. By the third person he runs into who's in on this, and honestly, they explained it to those in town that were gonna be in on it, that it was just a little bit of a prank. They did not go into this as a full experiment, right? They were just like, "We wanna prank this kid and see what happens." So more people would be willing to do it. If the word experiment is on it, people would shy away, right? By the third person, and it was like a beer distributor that he had to talk to about where he worked, that sort of thing. This beer distributor says, "Whoa, man, I don't know if how are you feeling? You don't look really good." By the time he got to that third person, because that was implanted in his mind, he starts telling this third person, the beer distributor, that he's got a kink in his back. His stomach is not feeling good. Like it feels very bloated and unhappy. Uh, I kid you not. He then didn't go to work. He went to the doctor. And I kid you not, the doctor then examined him and he was coming down with the flu. He was coming down with body aches, bloated stomach, queasy stomach, all within maybe an hour's time, 2 hours maybe, of his morning routine that he does every day. He was perfectly healthy just 4 days before that when he had a full exam. It was the power of the mind. It was the power of the mind. This little experiment blew the minds of all of these professionals and these doctors. They had no idea what to really do with this. This was, I mean, we know it as in when biblical terms would be coming out of Casey's mouth, like you are living water, your body is a temple, your mind is a builder. It's like they knew it, but they had never seen it in actual demonstration, manifestation form that they introduced into the power of the mind. I see Lori has come in. Good to see you, my dear. And Centurion's son, always a political. Like I said, experiments, quote unquote, the readings, different kinds of questions. This is when that started coming into play. And I will tell you, kind of for a little while, it did stay a bit more controlled. I want to use that word, as in they were learning. So usually when you're in the process of learning what stuff is, how far you can go with things, boundaries here, usually in that process, you're not then thinking way out of the box about, you know, are there aliens? Usually that's not where you're at. So things were for who we are in today's world, we would see all of these things as well. We take that for granted. That's common sense in a lot of ways. What you tell yourself, you will manifest, right? We kind of take these things for granted in today's world that we know. They didn't know this stuff, even if it was in a bunch of different forms of scripture or beliefs or occultism that was very popular at the time, the occult. Just because it was said and spoken, and it was this thought kind of out there lingering that there's this concept of how powerful the mind is, does not mean that they saw it in representation form in that demonstration of the manifestation of it. They this is new. This is very new and very insightful and groundbreaking breaking for a lot of these doctors. So with that, they also were kind of understanding because most of this committee of 6 and the one woman who was transcribing, well, they were all very connected to the medical profession. There was, I think, a couple of men. One was from like this um, part of the university, like the business department, that was like the high professor there, the dean or what have you. I don't know. There was a dentist, a part of this group, right? So kind of medical, but not maybe knowing all of the internal aspects. Do understand that this was also scary. They base their career, their livelihood, how they provide for their family, they base it on curing and helping people who are sick. And they are now learning it's really in the power of that person's mind. Well, that's intimidating. They kept going with their learning and understanding, but I'm not saying that at some point, as we will learn at the very end of this, things might have been lost in the mix. Let's say that. Uh, here's another example. Cayce, during a trance, during a reading, would there was a woman who was very sick, um, stomach issues. What we know now is like ulcers and the bloat that can happen with ulcers. She couldn't eat. I mean, it was a problem. I mean, she was wasting away. Cayce, in one of his readings, then, and it was one of the most oddest readings uh, recorded as far as medical wise. He told her very boldly, whoever he was being the messenger for, to not pay attention to anything that the doctors were saying. Now, do remind, I have to remind you, this is doctors recording this, right? Thank goodness they had that one woman who is more partial to following what Cayce says, opposed to holding back, and she is transcribing everything. He told this woman who was very ill to forget everything that the doctors were telling her to do. Instead, he wanted her to take a lemon candy, and please do know the lemon candies at the turn in like 1905 are very different than lemon candies of today, right? He told her that when she woke up in the morning to take a lemon candy, cut it in half, take one half of it, and then go for a walk. But not too far because you have to ensure that you can make it back. And then when you get back, you take the other part of the candy, the other part, and roll it in salt, suck on that, and drink a ton of water. Do that every morning upon waking up. The doctors in the room did hear this message. It was sent to the woman because for them, they are just trying to understand, is this going to work? How's this work? How does he know? Within weeks, that woman was vastly healthier, able to eat, keep food down. She was putting the weight back on. She was doing wonderful. We know now that back then at the turn of the century, if a woman was ill, you didn't really have her go out and get fresh air, right? You would have her lay in bed. We know the differences as in food from then, food from now. We know that when we, you know, suck on a cough drop, a really good cough drop, it helps with any maybe burning that we have in the throat. It helps with things that might have happened overnight because our stomach was upset. So we know that that is helping relax our stomach, relax our throat, relax everything. And we also know that at the turn of the century, that salt that she probably had, that she rolled her other half of lemon candy in, was most likely not, iodine salt, or it was iodine and potassium chloride salt. It wasn't this horrible stuff that we have now. It was probably true salt that was good for the body, especially when you chase it with a ton of water, like you said. That salt was helping her body retain and receive the water into now what is now much more smooth and clear, right? We know all this stuff. We know this stuff now. When they got that reading, they thought it was the most ridiculous thing they had ever heard. You want her to eat candy in the morning and go for a walk. You really think that's going to work compared to all of our knowledge, all of our education? And it did. It did. We know now. Dr. Benjamin Goins, who does videos here with his detox system of iodine, gold, and silver, when he first was studying and in college learning all that stuff, neuroscience that he knows, all the stuff, it was Edgar Cayce's readings that inspired him to look at iodine. It came from all of these Edgar Cayce readings that talked so much about how we need iodine in our bodies. That inspired Dr. Ben to then start researching this stuff, and now that's his passion. At the turn of the century, a lot was going on, right? A lot of people did not know, and also just within a couple of decades, a lot of things were being changed about our diets. So going. Oh, honestly, I gotta tell another one. This is so good. This is so good. This is where I'm kind of really hanging out here for a while with all these different experiments that lead to experience, right? I'm really hanging out here because this is it's so wonderful to know that at least Edgar felt safe enough with these people to do this. And this is the time where we learned Edgar is capable of giving messages across the board. There was one, this is so much fun. I hope you guys are having fun too, because this stuff is fascinating. There was one, actually, I'm going to tell two more because I can. There was one, this is great. Not great, it is a tragedy, but there was a murder in Canada, and one of the men on the committee, it was like his hometown in Canada. Very odd murder. It was kind of a wealthy family, and all the police in Canada could suspect was that when one of the daughters was walking down the stairs, she was shot on the stairs and died. That's all they could really, they had no suspects, they had no reason why, they were a wealthy family, but yet nothing was taken, so it was not a robbery. She was not, dating anyone, this was not a romantic issue, this was not, they had absolutely no idea, but it also scared the community. So one of the guys on the committee is getting word of this from back home that no one has a clue as to what happened to this poor girl. So they asked Cayce. Oh my goodness, folks. They asked Cayce. I'm getting to, I want to read it from the actual biography here because it was fascinating. And I apologize. It's taking me one moment to find it. I hope you all are having a pleasant, wonderful day. Okay, let's get into it. Ooh, I found it. I have a lot of markings in this book, so sometimes where I'm actually at is... All right, folks. One public demonstration was requested by a Professor Lambert at the Bowling Green Business College. Oh, I forgot that. There were times, and this is why I brought up how Gertrude wasn't told at the beginning. We will get to that at a different episode. But there were times that this committee decided, let's have Cayce do readings in public. It could be like a public private event. Like all these professionals would be invited to witness what Cayce's doing, or sometimes like a college event where then students were witnessing. Okay. So I, forgive me, I had it wrong. This was someone, um, a Professor Lambert of Bowling Green College, that he's the one that was from Canada. Okay. So I apologize. I had that wrong. So going back to which, yeah, we're going to get into the Gertrude thing later. One public demonstration was requested by a Professor Lambert at the Bowling Green Business College, who was interested in a murder that had taken place in his hometown in Canada. The victim had lived with her sister in an elegant home. Police investigators didn't have a suspect or a motive. All the investigators had concluded, based on the available evidence, was that a woman was shot sometime in the afternoon when she was walking down the stairs to the first floor of her house. The trance information that Lambert received said that one sister, so this is what came out of Cayce when Lambert asked in a public demonstration of his gifts. Cayce said that one sister had killed the other. It also told the name, so Cayce being the messenger, it also told the name, make, and serial number of the pistol used, its caliber, the fact that it was purchased in Roanoke, Virginia, and the number of empty chambers in it. Furthermore, it stated that the sister, after firing the weapon, threw the pistol out the window into a gutter along the roof, where the pistol slid down the drain pipe and could be found just at the point where the gutter entered the sewer. Lambert sent the information to the chief of police in the Canadian town. By all accounts, Cayce's data proved to be so accurate that the chief of police in Bowling Green received warrants and extradition papers for both Cayce and Lambert. So pause there for a moment. Cayce's details to where the gun is, what type of pistol it is, how many bullets are in the chamber, who did the killing, were so detailed that clearly they had to been a part of it. This is stuff that people might not, this is for messengers and readers out there, have discernment, right? You got to have discernment. This is why Cayce put that committee around him, that little bit of protection. So they find out from the Bowling Green police that there's warrants for they're they're the police in Canada are like, "We gotta come get those guys because clearly they're a part of this murder." Which, oh my goodness. Could you imagine being Casey hearing that? Oh my goodness. When the situation was explained to the Canadian official, he requested that a second reading be conducted to describe the motive of the crime. According to the reading, the victim had sabotaged her sister's relationship with a young suitor. She had written a love letter in which the man asked, or she hidden, I'm sorry, she hid a love letter in which the man asked the sister's hand in marriage. So a little a little bit ago, the younger sister, I think it was a younger sister thing. The older sister was kind of now head of the household. Received a letter which would be appropriate to ask for his her sister's hand in marriage. She hid that. Mm. The sister found the letter many years later, long after the love of her life had given up hope and left to marry another woman. The Bowling Green police chief sent the report to Canada, and the sister, right, the suspect, was confronted with the story. After hearing a description of the reading, she reportedly confessed and was sent to prison. She was going to probably be able to get away with it. Rich family, probably just a couple of sisters living together and maybe some help, right? Which help don't talk. We know this, right? That's not what would happen. She lost her mind and just shot her sister for ruining her life. Like, probably seeing it as, "You're gonna make me an old spinster like you." And I just lost the love of my life years ago too. I mean, this is like opening new wounds, and then there's a pistol. My goodness. So once again, now they're like, "Whoa, this is not just even medical. This is not just even spiritual. This is not just the power of the mind and suggestion. This is not just the how a room is decorated. What lengths? Where are the boundaries of this gift?" Before we continue, because these two things are going to kind of tie in with each other. Okay. I want to say that when Edgar would try to explain the mind as a builder, and then they ran that experiment to who made a perfectly fine, good young man ill with the power of suggestion, the power of inducing a thought into another human being. Edgar had always been very clear that just because we can maybe learn that it is possible to do that, to basically kind of control the actions, behaviors of others by the power of suggestion, that it was not the right thing to do. I'm going to read this for a moment. In the years ahead, Edgar conducted similar experiments and also helped other people to develop their own powers of mental telepathy. The conclusions that he eventually came to was that everyone had the same ability to affect people's behavior as he did. They just didn't take the time to practice using it. I'm just going to say you can become a patron of Stars of the Morning Light and start to develop how to use it in a healthy, positive, beneficial for all ways. But he did learn that after all these different experiments through the years and helping others to understand their power of the mind, their mental telepathy, understand that all humans can, as I do. I know all humans can. They just didn't take the time to practice using it. The only difference was that Edgar seemed to have been born with the talent, length in later readings. However, was born or developed the talent on their own, didn't make it right. Edgar cautioned everyone that mental telepathy was dangerous business and that trying to use thought as a means to control another individual was morally wrong. This is now in quotes. The very thing you would control in another individual, as he cautioned people, will be the thing that will destroy you. It will become your Frankenstein. Hear me out. All of you, everyone, we have this power. We demonstrate it within ourselves all the time. We actually are doing it with other people all the time. This is why, especially with patrons of Stars of the Morning Light, we learn that words pretty much trump, override intentions every time. Every time. Because most people don't even know what their true intentions are because it's mixed in with our feelings and our unknown motives or even our known motives. Intentions get tricky. Words, though, it doesn't matter because our words are manifesting all the time because it's our words that get into other people's minds. So when you are a patron of Stars of the Morning Light, we very much do focus on things like this. Taking that responsibility, knowing that we are these beautiful humans walking around, these lovely, beautiful stars, knowing that we have this power, well, then we practice, that word, practice, first catching our thoughts to help ourselves. Because many people have so many horrible thoughts that go on in the brain, and we don't even catch the fact that we are telling ourselves that we are sick, that we are ugly, that we are dumb, that we will not succeed, that we have lack, that we will be rejected, whatever the thoughts may be. First, we have to catch them, and then we have to become responsible with our words for ourselves and others. It's a very powerful gift that word has. So he always would caution people that very thing that you might want to control in someone else will be what destroys you. It will become your Frankenstein. This is where we get things like be careful what you ask for, because people's intentions are usually all mucked up because it's based on our current feelings and motives that we are either aware of or unaware of. Words, words, words. Be careful with what you say, right? And I love all people, but we are all very gifted with this. Hence, those who know and understand it and use it, and those who are unaware of it, then there's the power play. Then those who use it become their own Frankenstein, and those who are unaware of it, it is due time to become aware of it. So, with that being said, There's also another time, and this is gonna maybe be a kind of a long video, and I apologize for that, but, this is such a lovely, uh it was such a rich time of understanding this gift and also all of the beautiful lessons and things we can learn about the body of form, us humans, our mind, our soul. I mean, they were learning so much, and I think that's where I'm kinda hanging out here. So there was another moment, and that murder one, I do have to say, Cayce learned a lot with that. He did. He learned a lot with, having to establish boundaries even within the committee, and also, what is, asked and what is demonstrated for the public. Not saying he's not happy that it didn't help, but on the onset, Canada was about to try to, arrest him. So, lots of learning on all sides here. Cayce about his own gift. Remember, Cayce at this time still thought that somebody else has to facilitate. Somebody else has to ask all these questions. He's learning in that within the same time he can answer gifts about all sorts of stuff. He thought it was just medical. So he's learning within himself, oh my goodness, what the heck is going on? Right? Also grappling still with the acceptance, because if it was just medical readings, he saw the good in that. He finally enough had transpired and he was able to witness that it was helping and healing. And remember, that will always be Cayce's main goal, to help others, to be in some form of service and help to others. So I'm not saying that with like answering the question about who murdered this young woman or this woman, it's not that he was disappointed with finding the killer. It was having to have the discernment and being cautious as to what questions I answer and what questions do I not answer, and how do I create a bit more protection, and is this serving? This will come up much later in his biography if you stick with Stars of the Morning Light here, because there's stuff that goes on, right? So he at one point too, another concept was brought up, right? So not only can he solve murder mysteries, not only can he describe in detail all sorts of things and accounts. This was, and I'm just going to retell this story. There was a railroad accident that did injure people, but they had no idea how that accident actually happened. So one of the people on the board of the railroad um, contacted for Cayce to ask, to ask Cayce, I mean. And so they did, because they did need to know, how did this big accident happen? Well, Cayce told them it was one of the conductors. He missed, pulling the lever, turning the switch for it to veer off the other way. For whatever reason, he missed it. And Cayce then told these people, oh, he then said, if you do not fire, I'll use today's word, if you do not fire this individual, this will happen again. Well, they got that report. Very quickly jot down. He said the name. He said what happened. You should fire this individual. Well, they got the information, but they didn't really like what they got. So they contacted again to do another reading. Like, basically, is there a way we can address this without firing him and maybe move on from this? Okay, one of those, which I understand because even in today's world, to find to know someone who is in being trained in being a railroad train conductor who knows how to run that entire thing, that is a skill that even back in the day when we used trains more frequently, it's not just some random Joe on the street, is what I'm saying. You wouldn't just want to fire someone when that was it's a very complex position to then just rehire, okay? So I kinda understood why they're saying, "Well, if we don't fire this guy, how do we make this correct? How do we fix this?" Casey then his then second reading to these people, he mm, he had his first precognition reading for someone, meaning he was telling them what would happen in the future if you don't fire this man. And he did. He said, and it's wild, it is so, I'm going to read that. So, this is what he told them. In a trance, Casey said, if the one, like the person, if the one person who is asking these questions, okay, in a trance, Casey said, if the one we have we have given if the one we have given that caused this trouble is allowed to remain in the service. Okay, so if the person I do want to emphasize when you are receiving a message from the Akashic, we is always attached to it. We is how receive the messages because it's a we that is communicating. So they're saying the one that you're asking about, that train conductor, if the one we have given that caused this trouble is allowed to remain in the service, he will, before the 1st of December, be the direct cause of an accident, which will mean the death of the one who refused this information. It will happen in Virginia and West Virginia. So the Akashic, the messengers of the Akashic, the beings there that Edgar is speaking for, said, if the one guy that we told you did this, if you don't let him go, he then is going to cause an accident that kills the guy asking about this in the first place. And this is the interesting part. Not only did they say before December, but it will happen in Virginia and West Virginia. Well, now imagine receiving that. Whoa. Okay. If I'm thinking turn of the century, hard to find a new conductor, they get that message, and it's so odd. Of like, how would he even kill like the CEO of the railroad department, right? So they dismissed it. They dismissed it. The main guy dismissed it. And then he just kind of carried on with, oh, I guess we're just going to, it's been long enough now with all these correspondences back and forth that we're just going to kind of, push everything under the rug. We're going to sweep it under the rug, right? They want to point out the biographer and the committee and what was happening here. There were two interesting things about this reading. The source implied that taking certain measures, disaster could be avoided. In other words, the future was not preordained. It could be altered. The reading also suggested the existence of something like karma, the theme that would reappear in Cayce's reading more and more in later years. The man who refused the information provided would suffer for not acting on it. Ooh. 9 months after Edgar Cayce gave the initial reading for the railroad executive, news reached Bowling Green of a tragic train wreck involving the individuals named in the reading. The employee who had failed to throw the switch to change the tracks the first time repeated his mistake, this time causing another accident. The railroad executive who had requested the information and hadn't acted on it was in a private car on the same tracks. Cayce's prediction that it would occur in Virginia and West Virginia had come true, for the train smashed into the private car and pushed it over the to the next. Wild, folks. Could you imagine? I hope you all have chills. This community around Edgar is learning such valuable things that when Edgar says things that is not comprehensible to us, like this accident will happen in Virginia and West Virginia. In the moment, we can't, what? How could that even be? Well, it can be if we are in a train and a car, and that train, because of propulsion, pushes from Virginia into West Virginia. Wow. We can't think of stuff like that. The main thing here that was completely cited and then discussed uh, throughout a long period of time, this concept of life is not preordained. Cayce's reading was very clear. If you do not fire this train conductor, worse is going to happen. But if you did, then all would be safe, right? They didn't heed because we couldn't wrap our heads around how could that even happen? A train happen in an accident happened in two states? That line right there, I think, confused the heck out of them, and they dismissed it all. Oh, let's just dismiss this because we can't even go. And that's another thing. You can't really just fire somebody because a psychic told you they made a mistake, right? They didn't have any evidence. They didn't even know who did it in the first place. Not so easy, right? You can't just, hey, this psychic down in Kentucky told me that you were the one who messed up. You can't necessarily do that, especially if on the back end of all of this communication is you will die and you're going to die technically in two different states. I would too, as just a standard logical human being, go, okay, this is baloney. Well, then think his committee now got this. The concept of life is not preordained. And I've talked about this a few times when I'm talking about the Akashic or here talking about Edgar Cayce life skills. When someone asks me a question about the future, It is always going to be based off of and I'll tell them it's based off of your energy of right now, meaning your thought habits and behaviors, the actions you're doing, how Edgar said thoughts are deeds. It's based off of where that individual is in that moment. So before I even answer what is being presented to me, I always have to do that little bit of dialogue, which is me speaking, not them, but I have to do it to help that person understand nothing is written in stone. Absolutely zero is written in stone. Nothing is preordained. Some might argue, well, big things are preordained for like the collective. Not if the collective changes itself, right? The collective all of a sudden swooped this beautiful spirit of, I will no longer watch media, flew through the land, and all humans said, I will no longer watch the media. That'd be a massive change, as into the predictions that the media is putting out there, right? Same micro, macro, it's all the same jazz. There is absolutely nothing written in stone. So when there is a reading involved, the future, as many might ask, is based on the current available energy that can present some form of predictive scenario, situation. And oftentimes it could be, well, if you continue down the way you're going, X, Y, and Z will happen. If you decide to do this, X, Y, and Z will happen. If you choose to go this way, X, Y, and Z will happen. Because it's all a choice. Everything is a choice. Everything. And then our choices, our everyday choices, create and spin this beautiful weave, this beautiful energy that then weaves into a future prediction. But nothing is written in stone. That was very new to many people that for a very long time, it's very restricted thought thought patterns and beliefs. There's right, there's wrong. There's you got one life. You got heaven or hell. Destiny, fate, all these words and concepts. I mean, unless you get stuck in purgatory, right? All these very um like mortar. I mean, they feel like just mortar when I say words like destiny and fate. It feels like I'm being, held down by mortar because that's the energy of those words. But it also leaves out the responsibility of those involved then. The train the railroad executive had a responsibility to the business, to the people who were originally hurt, to further the future potential of people being hurt. And so we learned a lot about quote unquote karma, quote unquote, there is nothing preordained, quote unquote, our decisions determine a lot of what will happen, right? This was all fascinating to people. And that was his first precognitive reading that resulted in death. I mean, really, folks. Fascinating. There's some other stuff that happened at this time, too. At one point, Dr. Blackburn, who kind of saw over the committee, but like I said at the beginning, not all the men would be present. I mean, heck, some of them would be seeing a patient, some of them would be class, some of them would be taking somebody's tooth out because they're a dentist. I mean, so sometimes it'd be one or two guys, maybe just Dr. Blackburn. He was the one who tried to facilitate the most. There was a time, like I said at the beginning of this, he was not accustomed to how the communication might just not stop, right? The communication might not stop. Like Edgar might not stop talking. It could be that he describes every little minutia, every little sight, every little sound of a particular person, place, or thing, and it just wouldn't stop. Well, that is a lot for Dr. Blackburn if there's no transcriber there to try to write down. And I do want to tell people, if you are trained in being a messenger of the Akashic, oh yes, that is a thing. I mean, it just keeps coming. It can just keep coming. I have trained myself. I got to cut it off. I'm done. I'm done talking about this. I mean, that person is clearly done listening to me. I'm done. Like, because it will just keep coming. You can talk about everything. You can see and know everything. So it just, it's up to the messenger to know what to say, what not to say, when to stop talking, when to move on to the next question, when to, all of it, which is not easy. Edgar didn't know he had a choice in the matter, so he just kept going until someone, the facilitator, would shut it down. So at one point, it's just Dr. Blackburn and Edgar's in a trance, and he's asking some random stuff. And Cayce is just going and going and going, and Dr. Blackburn is trying to write all this down. And at some point, so imagine Cayce's laying on a bed or laying on a couch, and Blackburn is kind of sitting right, you know, um, right in front of Cayce and trying to write all this down. Like kind of when somebody's sick and you're sitting right there and, how are you doing? That kind, it was that close. Blackburn was not across the room or on a desk behind him taking these notes. No, this was like an intimate, he's in a chair, Cayce's on the couch. They're right next to each other. So at some point, Blackburn, just out of natural motion and whatnot, he's trying to write. And at some point, it's like he moved his hand to say, hold up. He literally said the words, hold up. I need, let me take a minute. He said, his words were, hold up there, not so fast. At the mention of the word up, Cayce was reported to float up from the couch so that his chest pressed against Blackburn's extended hand. Only Blackburn saw this. Cayce had never done this before, nor ever again, quote unquote, levitated. It was as if, he's writing and he's probably not even looking to where his hand is. And he goes, and it hits Cayce somewhere near his third chakra area. And we're going to bring this up because stuff did happen in his third chakra area. And as if then Cayce, because it said up, his whole body then raised up from the couch and touched Blackburn's hand, which then immediately Blackburn pulled his hand back because he doesn't know what's going on. So he's freaked out, and Cayce dropped back down to the couch. Another scenario. Now there's some more men around. It was like a group, conversation. Put Cayce under, put him in his trance. At one point, imagine Blackburn sitting in front of the couch, and then some of the other men who are witnessing, right? And then, the transcriber's there. She's doing her job. She might be a little bit closer to Cayce, but Blackburn's sitting in a chair by the couch. Cayce's laid out. Okay. Well, during one of these readings, one of the other gentlemen handed to Blackburn over the couch where Cayce was laying, so over Cayce's body, a piece of paper that had the next question on it. He handed it over Cayce's body, and with that, all of them, and it would have been the third chakra area. With that, all of them saw that Cayce kind of bent forward as if his stomach muscles clenched real tight and lifting up his shoulders, like how we would go, oh, like, oh, as if we got hit in the stomach. His body did that. He made that noise, and the reading was completely done as if the connection was severed. And that happened just because a fellow man was handing a piece of paper over the couch Cayce was laying on. They didn't touch him. They didn't touch him. They didn't disturb him. What they did is they somehow broke the connection. This we might talk about later. There's reasons I brought this up. There's reasons why I brought up the concept of experiment so heavily before. At this time as well, guess who he met with, folks? Yes, fascinating. Guess who came to see Edgar? Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. Oh, yeah, the three of them had some quality time together. Oh, my goodness, right? What is known from actually multiple conversations, and sometimes only the three of them in the room, very much so, oftentimes. But when other people would be able to be there and transcribe and take things down and be present for what is discussed, it just so happens, especially I guess with the conversations with Tesla and the questions he would ask and the back and forth, um, we don't have that documentation anymore when it was recorded. What some of it was burned in a happenstance fire in Cayce's photography studio. Then again, years later, after they had met a few times, one of Cayce's assistants got rid of something she clearly didn't know what it was, apparently. We don't have the documentation, but we do know that they got together. Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, and Edgar Cayce did get together multiple times. So, here was the thing that we do know about that. I'm looking for where I want to take you all. So we do know that Tesla, in a lot of ways, he would reference that he would get his inspiration from quote unquote his higher source or higher self. This is also where they thought Cayce, who he thought he was communicating with, which technically, yes, is a part of the transmission of communication. Your higher self is a part of what's going on here, right? So Tesla was already aware kind of what Cayce was doing, but it looked very different for the men. How Tesla would communicate and how Edgar would communicate. And Thomas Edison, he didn't pay that no never mind. He thought he was just coming up with the inventions because that was how beautiful his mind is, which could be very true. I'll take beautiful, intriguing inventions however they come. So Tesla would say that it was more through dreams, when Edgar would have to go into a trance state. Okay. This is the part that we are going to end on this as well, folks. So we opened with all these different experiments that would lead to experience, that they're learning, wow, what boundaries of knowledge or lack thereof boundaries. Maybe Casey has limitless access to all the information. We don't know, right? This is when we're running experiments from technically mind control, technically learning how powerful the mind is, um, to maybe we don't pay attention to the doctor so much, as in they don't even have the correct diagnosis or medical cures at the time to let's solve some murders. We are experiencing and experimenting so much right now, right? And then supposedly he gets together with Thomas Edison and Nicholas Tesla multiple times, but we don't have the documentation. That's wild. That is wild, people. Out of all of the readings, so we're going to go with what history tells us. We're going to go with, okay, there was just a fire in the photo studio, but yet it didn't burn down the studio. Not yet. Like, that's not what we're talking about here. It's Gladys, who was his right hand secretary. We'll talk about that relationship later as we go through, who accidentally threw away papers of conversations with Tesla. I am not a conspiracy person. I'm not. But what I am for is self preservation and protection of messengers, the protection of messengers. I do, I do care about that. So sometimes, even though we would love to have the information, we would love to know what was talked between the three of them, what was discussed, what was understood, what was acknowledged, what was learned, what was invented. Even though we would love to know this, in the pursuit of a messenger having to protect themselves and possibly loved ones or others, I will always be more, let's say, open to receiving that they did the right thing there than preserving history in our curiosities. That's just me. Safety first, folks. Safety first. So, unfortunately, we don't have that information. I think it was probably the right call, let's say. I think it was the right call to probably get rid of it. Because this, and this is what they talked about so much. We do know this, at least the topic. That the source was not only capable of addressing this topic, but believed that it could provide an important avenue or bridge for raising the consciousness of inventors seeking to understand the relationship between science and spirituality, which, according to source, same thing. This is Edgar's actual words. Electricity is at the heart of all life. Cayce in a trance would frequently tell these inventors, electricity is life. We know now so much about frequency. about energy, about physics, quantum physics. We know so much that when Edgar frequently, not just talking to Tesla and Edison, in many readings would say electricity is life. Well, we know that that means energy. And I'm going to leave us here and we're going to pick back up with all this stuff. So here's my life skills for today. After we've learned all of this, we started opening up with a committee to run experiments and how we actually all run experiments all the time without acknowledging that we're doing it. Same as we're mind controlling ourselves and others, often with the words that we think and say, but we're not aware that we're doing it. Based on then all that experimentation and all the different examples we covered, to end with electricity is life. Electricity is the heart of all life. Energy is life. So as we walk away from this episode, and thank you, please give me a thumbs up. Leave a comment below if you're watching this later. I hope you all enjoyed yourself in the chat. I see that Jackie J came in. Good to see you, my dear. I saw that Cricket came in. Good to see you, my dear. The fact that we know so much more now does not does not enhance our awareness that every day we are using that energy that is life in experiments and mind control ourselves. So as we walk away from this episode, right? As we walk away from all this and think about all these things, it was brand new for them. Brand new. We are much more aware and informed. But yet, do we live in our waking day, our going to the grocery store, in our conversations with family, friends, spouses? Are we acknowledging the awareness that we do know this stuff? Or are we just moving right along? Knowing that life is energy, all is energy, it is the heart of life, knowing that we're technically running experiments and controlling our bodies and possibly other people's bodies. Where are we with this? Are we aware of it, but not in our waking life, not in our actual thoughts or deeds, as Cayce would say? Thoughts or deeds? Are we just blasé and we just keep going? It's very, and don't do it in judgment to yourself. Don't question this in judgment, but observe yourself. Observe yourself. Are the words coming out of my mouth beneficial for myself and others? Is my energy, what is it doing? If it's my life, what's going on with my energy? Run your own experiments if they are safe for yourself and others. Easy one. For multiple 3 to 5 days straight. Every day say with your hand to your heart, I love you. I love you. I love you, self. I love you. That's an experiment. See how you feel at the end of it. Run experiments as much as you can if it is in the benefit of yourself and others, so you can start identifying that, wow, this is all the time, 24/7. I am manifesting and demonstrating. Those two words mean the same thing. Manifesting and demonstrating the power of the mind, and that all is energy. Not groundbreaking for us, but yet we still don't recognize it in all that we do. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm definitely not saying it's easy, but it's nice to be reminded of how powerful we actually are, that we could flip the tides at any time because nothing is preordained, but it does take catching our thoughts, acknowledging the awareness we have, and then utilizing it. As Edgar would say, they just don't practice it. Then utilizing all the information we have in our regular everyday walking around life. Imagine, just imagine. And Jackie J just said in the chat, I will work on this. That's all I'm proposing. Practice. Surprise yourself. I will leave with this then. I did have a college professor who repeatedly over and over again said this, and I did not understand it, and I know you all have heard me say it before, but I very much understand it now. So for a whole semester, he repeated it and repeated it and repeated. I did not understand it until like a decade later, anyways. He would say that the greatest thing about being a human is that we have the capacity to surprise ourselves. It's true. I can guarantee you my dog is not going to surprise himself. My dog knows what's going on as he is a dog. That's where his consciousness is. Other animals, all of nature, it has a rhythm and flow. It has a rhythm and flow. We are that unique being that all of a sudden we could wake up one day and go, I've been turning right for the past 19 years. Just going right. Just going right. I'm just going right. I just turned right for the past 19 years. I'm going to turn left today and see what the hell happens. I'm going to run an experiment and see what happens. We are the ones that can do that. So, the greatest thing about being a human is that we have the capacity, the opportunity, the capability to surprise ourselves. And nothing is better than that. So, that's what I say. Go surprise yourself. Surprise yourself. Remember how great you are within that surprise. How powerful and great and wonderful all you beautiful stars are. So with that, folks, thanks for coming. This was Edgar Cayce Life Skill Studies, bringing 100 years forward, present, talking about the Akashic, talking about Edgar Cayce's life in this one, the bio, and I am Courtney, host of Stars of the Morning Light. Thank you, everyone who came into the chat. If you're catching this on the flip side, please give me that thumbs up. Share it out to others. I am still seeking at least 500 new subscribers. If you are new here, welcome. Go surprise yourselves, everybody. And remember to keep shining. I'll see you guys later. Bye.